All right, cholesterol, high cholesterol in your bloodstream definitely going to kill you and give you heart disease. Well, let's talk about some interesting facts that have been shown over the years with regard to cholesterol, which I think are interesting. So let's start with birth. Now, a baby normally is supposed to drink breast milk, right? That is what a normal baby would do. I think everybody would argue that that is the appropriate way to feed, particularly an infant, right? And well, what happens to cholesterol when you breastfeed a baby? Well, their cholesterol goes up to a dangerous average level of 205 milligrams per deciliter. Remember, we're often told to keep our cholesterol below 200 and sometimes below 190, and even lower depending if we have some other health conditions. So perhaps these babies need to right away be put on statin drugs, perhaps, or we shouldn't breastfeed babies, perhaps. Maybe that argument could be made to protect those babies from the evils of cholesterol. So starting at birth, our cholesterol goes up into dangerous levels just from the get-go. Now, the next interesting sort of fact is that, let's start at the other end of life. There is a study out there that shows that people that have dementia, when they are on lipid-lowering drugs like statins, and here's a trial here that showed that the people that had dementia, when they removed the statins and allowed their cholesterol to go higher, their cognitive function improved significantly. And then they put them back on the statins, and guess what? Their cognitive function decreased again. So statins in old demented people, where they lower the cholesterol, is worse for their cognition, at least in this particular study. There is obviously this large 12.8 million person study that showed that cholesterol level of 210 to 240 was associated with the greatest amount of longevity. Now that is 12.8 million people, and very low cholesterol was associated with increasing mortality from all causes. Now again, some people will say at those low levels that is merely just reverse causation, but certainly it doesn't explain why. The higher levels tend to be associated with higher all-cause mortality or lower rates of all-cause mortality. Here's another interesting, fact. Since about the 1950s or 60s, total cholesterol numbers have dropped across the board, population-wise, by about 20 points, and cardiovascular disease still the number one killer. The incidence has not really decreased very much, even though we've quit smoking largely. We went from smoking at 45% of the population in around 1954 down to about 13% as we do now. So population-wide, lowering of cholesterol has definitely happened. Cardiovascular disease is still way up there. Another interesting fact is that there is a class of drugs. Now, one of the things I will point out is that when people go on low-carb diets, whether it's keto, carnivore, or something like that, we often see a lowering of triglycerides. We often see a lowering of glucose, but sometimes we see an elevation of total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, and also ApoB. Those three all run in the same direction. If your total and LDL go up, your ApoB is going to go up, and if it goes down, it's going to go down as well. Now, there's a class of drugs called the SGLT2 inhibitors. So what this drug does is a diabetic drug, and it works by causing the kidneys to release a lot of glucose, and therefore lowered glucose, similar to what you might see on a low-carb diet. But what does it do? What does that drug do to the LDL cholesterol and the total cholesterol, and by extension the ApoB? It raises it. So it lowers glucose, lowers triglycerides, but raises LDL cholesterol, ApoB, and total cholesterol. What is the net effect on cardiovascular disease in these drugs? Well, it turns out that these drugs actually lower cardiovascular risk despite raising LDL cholesterol, which should set off some interesting alarm bells there. Why is that? It's very similar. Like my position around LDL cholesterol and ApoB and total cholesterol is you shouldn't ignore it. But are there mitigating factors? Similar to like when you're on an SGLT2 inhibitor, well, the net effect is lowered cardiovascular risk despite increasing LDL, despite, well, maybe in support of decreasing glucose, which is what you see often on a low-carb diet. So there you go, guys. There's some interesting facts about cholesterol in general. Again, I think it is far more nuanced than the people that say, lower it at all costs. It's always bad. I think we're finding that out. The other study I'll point out, I guess, which is often, I've mentioned this before, big study out of Denmark looking at thousands of people, 0 CAC score, what predicted a progression to cardiovascular events, heart attacks, strokes, revascularizations, sudden death. Well, if their CAC score was 0, no progression, LDL cholesterol had no bearing on progression of diseases. If it was not 0, then it did have an impact. But if it was 0, what had an impact on cardiovascular disease? Diabetes and smoking. So there you go, guys. It's far more complicated, nuanced than maybe you're being told. Hopefully we will, as a community, particularly in light of the lipid energy model, the lean mass hyperresponder, data is coming out, we'll be able to start to take a nuance here so we don't just blanket drug everybody, right? All right, guys, let me know what you guys think. We'll talk to you soon.